All right, you've only got 2 lessons left, and I'm hopefully gonna record, all today, and you'll just this will be it, for the, instructions. You'll have a last topic to do is gonna be a brief wrap of the class, a summarization of it, and that's it. And if you get it in early, I'm gonna give you some extra credit, but I'll give you 2 weeks to do it. I'll have more details on that next week. So, let's get at your last 2 lessons, and then you're done with world history. All right. So, hold on, percent now. Just getting it all set up. All right. All right. So the topic today is Israel and Palestine. A lot of issues between the two areas. One's a country, Israel, since 1946, and Palestine is the area, the surrounding countries around it, who are predominantly Arab in ethnicity. People of Israel are Hebrew or Jewish in terms of ethnicity. All right. So Israel on the bottom here is the size is located in the Middle East, and it's roughly the size of New Jersey, a small state, but it's the area of contention for thousands of years. Right? So when we look at this, it's kind of important to put your eyes to this first of all. So here's Israel, that is a country, and within Israel is an area called the West Bank. That's where the Palestinians, who used to have this land before 1946, have been placed. They had homes. The Palestinians had homes over here, and they've been moved in this area called the West Bank. So whatever they had here, they lost in 1946, or they lost through a series of wars, and they moved to the West Bank. Or they're moved to this area called the Gaza Strip. That's where they're also located. And the city, a holy city of Jerusalem for Palestinians and Jews, is Jerusalem. And that's kind of split. But for the most part, Israelis have control of Jerusalem, and the Palestinians have to go through checkpoints to get there. So there's a contention. You can definitely see Israel has more of the land, and the Palestinians living in the area have less of the land. All right. So there's a lot of things going on here. It's a holy city for a lot of religions: Christianity, Islam, Judaism. This is an event called the Intifada. Israel has always won every single war against the Palestinians. And the Palestinian kids just got so sick of losing that kids took up weapons and they threw them against Israeli tanks and soldiers in the 90s. It did not go well for the Intifada, to say the least, for the Palestinians. A major source of contention is things called checkpoints. If you're Israeli, you can go anywhere you want in the country past a checkpoint. It's like going to Chicago and having the iPass. You can just zoom on by. If you're Palestinian, you want to go anywhere in Israel, you have to go to these checkpoints and have your car searched for weapons. And there's multiple intifadas that have happened between Israel and the children of Palestine, and there's conflict all the time over this land that's sacred to both people, both sides saying it's their religion. All right, so to rewind this thing all the way to start of the 20th century, before the Holocaust, the turn of the 20th century, there's this movement called Zionism, and that is really, Jews have been scattered all throughout the world ever since the year 70 CE, when the Romans crushed them. They spread them Jews out over the world, and the turn of the 20th century, almost millennia later, there's a movement to get Jews to return back to what they thought was their holy land that was given to them by their God Yahweh. So that's Zionism, this movement in the 20th century for Jews to return back to the Holy Land. Once the Holocaust happens, there's really a big push to return Jews to their own Holy Land because of what happened to them in the Holocaust. So Jews have been kind of hated everywhere they've gone. You've got some examples in world history: A and B, Spanish Inquisition, they're persecuted for their religion or their ethnicity. Black Plague, same exact thing. And the Holocaust is the most recent one we talked about in world history B. So there's this real push to return them back to their Holy Land so they won't be picked on by other civilizations that they happen to migrate and live amongst. So this is the Jewish diaspora. They moved out over the millennia, and over time, after World War II, there's a movement to return them back to the Holy Land. The only problem about the returning them back to the Holy Land is there are already Palestinians living there for hundreds of years, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. The Palestinians have called it home. So in 1946, when they create a new Jewish country, they're basically taking the land from the Palestinians, who've been living there for thousands of years, and they're giving it to the Jews. All right. So the United Nations recommended this. They said that Israel should be divided in half, and that's what's going to happen. Who disliked the idea? The Palestinians, of course. Who liked the idea? The Israelis. So the Palestinians, when this first happens, They're not too happy about it. And here is a breakdown of where the Jewish settlements were. Small little areas. All right. And then you see 1947, here's the Arab state and the Jewish state. It's roughly 50-50 at this point, but that's going to change. So as soon as Israel gets the land, 46, 47, you have a war in 48. The Arabs, the Palestinians, did not like the idea of the United States and Great Britain really coming in and just telling them what they had to do. So they immediately go to war with this country, with Israel. And Israel is attacked. And Israel is a brand new country, barely has a military, so Israel needs help. And if they're going to seek help, it's going to be from us, the United States. All right. So they receive military aid from Great Britain and the United States. They get heavy artillery, fighter planes, and we have some of the best technology. By 1948, the Israelis are able to put it to use, and they crush the Palestinians. And because they crush the Palestinians, they take more of their land. And this is a crazy picture to me, but as the Palestinians are moved out of the prime areas, kind of into the desert, they have these refugee camps that are almost like tents, and they're kind of makeshift. They don't know where to go for the time being. So the Palestinians are moved out. And if you can fast forward decade after decade after decade from this event, the Palestinians who are living in these tent cities, they eventually morph into the cities they still live in. They're still living in these tent cities from 1948, and they've really lost more and more land. So what they're having to do is they're having to build up and up and up. But most of these Palestinian cities start as this 1948 loss when they're kicked out of land by Israel. And that's where they're forced to stay in the desert. Less than ideal conditions, but they've made a way. Fast forward to the 60s, Palestine is losing more and more land. So the Palestinians once again attack, and they're aided by other countries as well outside of them, Syria, Jordan, Egypt. So multiple Palestinian or Arab countries team up against Israel. They call it the Yom Kippur War, a 6-day war. It's a holy war. It's a holy time for Jews. And they attack them on their holy celebration, trying to catch them off guard. Well, Israel had been receiving military aid from the United States, a huge amount of supplies and weapons. So Israel is attacked, but in 6 days, they absolutely crushed the Palestinian forces. And because they crushed the Palestinian forces once again, they get more and more land. All right. They take this area called the Sinai Peninsula, which was predominantly Palestinian land. And truth be told, there's really nothing there but rock. But it's a huge swath of land. They took it from Egypt. All right. So 6-day war, another victory for the Israelis and a shocking loss for the Palestinians. They lose more and more land. So the Cold War has influenced this as well. The United States, of course, backs Israel. Soviet Union has backed predominantly Arab countries. So once again, they're picking sides in the Cold War. And the winners of the Cold War are us and ultimately Israel, because we won. And that's another connection, how the Cold War played out. The Arabs choose the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union loses. So over time, the Palestinians or the Arabs realize they cannot defeat Israel in conventional military war. They can't. The Israeli forces are too strong. They've got too much aid from the United States, too much military support. So if you can't beat someone on the traditional battlefield, this is when you start to see terrorism. And by the 70s, the Palestinians can't win in a war. They resort to terrorism. Bombings of buses, frequent. Bombing of aircraft or passenger planes. This is how the Palestinians strike back. There's even in 1972, Israeli athletes are taken at the Olympic Village, and they are murdered by terrorists. And who's funding all this really are countries that hate Israel. Iran sends supplies and forces into Israel to do this. Syria hates Israel. Other Arab nations. All right. So bombings, hijacking, hostages. And they're doing this because they can't win in conventional war. This is the only way to hurt Israel. And terrorism disrupts your system. It's designed to throw off your daily way of life and make Israelis feel uneasy, because the Palestinians themselves have felt unease for decades after losing so much land to the Israelis. So here's a snapshot. Here's Palestine, 1946. Anything green, Palestinian land. White, Jewish land. And there's the 50-50 split in 47. And then here's a snapshot of 1967 after the 6-day war. Israel's gaining more and more land. Here's a snapshot of 2000s. And the thing I want you to really notice is this land here in the West Bank, That's supposed to be Palestinian. But what you're seeing here is Israel is actually moving into these areas and making developments, and they're bringing their military with them, and they're taking the land that's supposed to be Palestinian and they're making it theirs. We usually watch a documentary and you see this family living in the West Bank who are Jews. They're Israelis, and there's a huge military presence because the Palestinians don't like losing the land that's supposed to be theirs, and there's a big point of conflict. Even right now, it's controversial at the United Nations. Palestinians don't like the fact that Israel's moving in. Israel thinks it's got a right to be there, and there's all sorts of conflict, even in the West Bank, which is supposed to be Palestinian land. So, some of the major organizations against Israel are the PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization. They're kind of deemed a terrorist organization by us, the United States, but their goal is to really take back all the land by any means necessary. So, if that means car bombings, if that means rioting, looting, smuggling of weapons, launching airstrikes, they'll do it. So that's why they're kind of deemed a terrorist organization by the United States. But to them, they'll do anything they want to get the land back. All right, that's the PLO. And what most common thing they're doing is right now they are launching rockets. They get rockets and they launch it into areas. So from the West Bank into Israel, as a way of revenge, and then or from the Gaza Strip into Israel. And what Israel has done is create this new thing called Iron Dome, where a Palestinian rocket will go up, and a Israeli rocket will go up and intercept the rocket and destroy it before it lands. It's crazy technology because these Iron Dome missiles, these Israeli missiles can go up and they can turn and move in the air to intercept incoming missiles. And it's such a smart system that when a missile's launched, it can detect where the missile's going to land. And if it's going to land in the middle of nowhere and kill no Israelis, it won't even bother to deploy a missile up. But if it's going to hit a high population center, it will go up and intercept the Palestinian rocket. But it is just crazy, the conflict that goes back and forth. All right. So, and this kind of connects to 9/11 as well. As you know, Osama bin Laden, leader of Al Qaeda, he really hated the fact that Israel is getting so much military aid to Israel, military weapons, military aid, and just economic aid. And since Israel has taken those military weapons to the United States to kill predominantly Muslims, that's how Osama bin Laden really soured on the United States. He thought the Americans were responsible for the death of Muslims. And that's why he declared a holy jihad. Not right. I completely disagree with him. But that's why he declared jihad against America and did 9/11 as an act of vengeance, as a way to protect Muslim lives. So there's a connection there, too, to the events of 9/11. All right. And we talk about Iron Dome here. This is the Israeli system to shoot down these rockets that come from the Gaza Strip of the West Bank, and they'll intercept these missiles before they hit an area. It's extremely impressive military technology. A lot of it was funded by the United States, but yeah. So that's it. It's pretty crazy stuff. So that's Israeli-Palestine. I don't suspect there's going to be any kind of peace in the future. It's an area of conflict that's been going on for millennia. So, all right, one topic done, one down, one to go. Then you're done with all the lectures. All right, bye.